John has been a zookeeper for years, devoted to the seals in his care, especially a newborn seal pup he'd grown particularly fond of. One day, this baby seal started showing unusual signs of distress, behaving oddly and appearing to shed tears, which alarmed John deeply. Concerned for its well-being, he reported the behaviour to his supervisor, who decided to review the CCTV footage for any clues to the pup's condition. However, what the footage revealed led to an outcome John never anticipated: his immediate dismissal. "What do you mean I'm fired?" John confusedly asked his boss. "I'm sorry, John, you gave me no other choice," his boss said as he folded his hands together. He had just watched the CCTV footage of the baby seal's enclosure after John had urged him to. "You have the rest of the day to pack your things and leave." John couldn't believe it. All he had wanted was to find out why the seal had been acting so distressed, and now he was the one getting fired. He had absolutely nothing to do with it. Working as a zookeeper was the best job John had ever had, and he was not ready to let it go just yet. While his boss was in a meeting, John sneaked into his office to look at the footage himself. When he finally saw what had been happening in the baby seal's enclosure, his eyes grew wide with shock. This had to stop, and John was going to make that happen. But why did his boss fire John? What did they see in the footage? And what had happened to the baby seal? Welcome to Wonderbot Animals. The local zoo was a social hub for many families. Everyone loved going there, but most of them only came for the seals. Every day around 12, they would put on a little mealtime show for the visitors, showing off their jumping skills and waving at the children standing front row. It was something John looked forward to almost every day. John was the showmaster, having taught the seals almost all their tricks. They trusted John and knew he would never do anything to harm them. But one Wednesday morning, while getting ready for the show, John noticed something wasn't right with the youngest baby seal. It was acting distressed, and there were even real tears rolling down its little cheek. Not knowing what had caused this behaviour, John quickly went over to one of his colleagues, Susan, who had cared for the seals the day before. However, his colleague also had no idea. She even told him the baby seal had acted like that yesterday as well. John was baffled. When he left work on Monday, the baby seal had been fine. Something must have happened on Tuesday while he wasn't working. John felt very responsible for the seal's well-being, so he wanted to get to the bottom of this. Whoever did something wrong that day would never confess out of their own free will, so John thought of another way to find out the truth. He had to look at the CCTV footage. There was one minor hiccup though. Zoo workers weren't usually allowed to look back at any CCTV footage they liked. There was a protocol they had to follow, and even then, it could be denied. It was all because of a privacy law, so John had to follow the rules. Knowing this was a time-sensitive matter, John went to his boss, hoping he would have a look at the footage himself. John's boss wasn't convinced at first, but after John described how important the well-being of the seals was to the zoo and how the zoo could lose a lot of profit if one of those seals were to upset the visitors, he agreed to watch the footage anyway. John, however, wasn't allowed to stay in the room, so he got back to work. The rest of the day, John waited to hear back from his boss. The feeding show went great, and all the visitors cheered as John made the big seals clap their flippers and jump off a plank. But all John could think about was the sad little baby seal. He did his best to pay extra attention to the baby seal so it would hopefully feel better, but he wanted to do more. At the end of the day, John decided he had waited long enough. His boss must have checked the footage by now. So he walked up to his office and knocked on the door. When the door opened, John could see his boss was a bit surprised to see him. "Ah, John, I've been wanting to speak to you," he said a bit hesitantly. "Have you checked the footage?" John asked hopefully. He wanted more than anything to help the baby seal, and that was only possible if he knew what had happened when he wasn't working. Yes," his boss began. It was clear he was searching for the right words to say something rather difficult. "What is it, boss?" John worriedly asked. "I'm sorry, but I have to let you go," his boss eventually said. John was stunned. "What do you mean?" he asked, a little taken aback. His boss sighed. "You have until tomorrow to get your things." It was like being punched in the stomach. John stood in silence, trying to comprehend what had just happened. "I'm fired," he eventually managed to say. John didn't budge from the spot, a mix of shock and defiance on his face. "I'm not going anywhere until you explain," he said, voice steady, but his heart racing. His boss, caught off guard, hesitated but stood firm. "John, you need to leave now," he said, his voice betraying a hint of regret. But John wasn't moving. This wasn't just about his job, it was about the animals he loved. "Why am I being fired?" John pressed, his voice rising in frustration. His boss looked away, avoiding eye contact. "I can't discuss it, John. Please, just leave," he said, his tone final. John's confusion deepened. What could possibly be on that footage to warrant such a harsh reaction? But his boss remained silent, walls up, refusing to give any clue that might help John understand. The standoff was broken when his boss picked up the phone and called security. Within minutes, a security guard entered, a look of surprise on his face upon seeing who he was supposed to escort out. "John, let's go," the guard said, his voice sympathetic but firm. John glanced once more at his boss, hoping for a last-minute reprieve, but there was none. It was time to go. As John cleared out his locker, the security guard watched in silence. "Tell him he's making a big mistake," John said, handing over his Zookeeper uniform. The guard nodded, understanding the weight of the moment. John's connection with the animals was well known, and his dismissal felt like a loss to more than just him. But John was resolute. This wasn't the end. He'd find a way back. Walking out of the zoo gates, John looked back at the enclosures, his determination hardening. He knew the seals, especially the distressed baby seal, needed him. They wouldn't respond well to anyone else. This job was more than a paycheck. It was a calling. As he walked away, John was already plotting his next move. He wasn't going to give up without a fight. This story was far from over. That evening, John sat on his couch, racking his brain for ways to reclaim his job. Ideas came and went like waves, but none strong enough to break the shore. He needed something solid, irrefutable. Mere words wouldn't sway his boss. Actions would have to speak louder. As the night deepened, the seeds of a plan began to form, vague but promising. Understanding his boss's stubborn nature, John knew that a simple apology or explanation wouldn't cut it. He needed undeniable proof of his innocence and the seal's well-being at stake. Throughout the night, John sketched out a bold strategy. It was risky, but it was his best shot at redemption. The plan was to catch the real cause of the baby seal's distress on camera. As the first light of dawn broke, John was already on his way back to the zoo. He kept a low profile, hoping to slip inside unnoticed and set his plan into motion. His heart pounded with a mix of nervousness and determination. The zoo, once a place of joy, now felt like a battlefield. John couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. Just as John neared the entrance, he spotted his boss heading towards the building. Panicking, he ducked behind a nearby bush, his heart skipping a beat. Watching his boss enter the zoo without a second glance back, John realized the full extent of his current outsider status. The familiarity of the place now seemed alien, a stark reminder of everything that had happened. Gathering his courage, John made his move towards the gate as soon as his boss disappeared from sight. But the moment he swiped his keycard, the red light blinked mockingly back at him. Denied access, the reality of his situation sank in. Standing there, a mix of frustration and helplessness washing over him, he knew he needed another way in. But what? Just as John was debating his next move, Susan arrived. Her timing couldn't have been more perfect. Seeing John, she paused, her expression a mix of surprise and concern. John felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe he wasn't out of options after all. Susan, always reliable, could be his unintended ally in this desperate moment. "Why are you here, John?" Susan asked, her forehead creasing with worry. She'd heard about his firing and couldn't piece together his presence outside the zoo. John scrambled for a believable excuse. "Oh, I just forgot some stuff at my desk," he lied, trying to sound casual. Susan eyed him for a moment, then, seemingly convinced, offered to let him in. John sighed in relief, but knew this was just the beginning of a tricky situation. Once inside, John felt a rush of familiar comfort mixed with a nagging guilt for deceiving Susan. He glanced around, half expecting to be caught at any moment. Susan looked at him, expecting him to lead the way to his former workspace. John knew he had to act fast. His real mission had nothing to do with forgotten items at a desk. Needing to part ways with Susan without arousing suspicion was John's next challenge. Thinking quickly, he muttered, "Actually, I need to hit the bathroom first." Before Susan could offer to wait, John darted off, leaving her in the hallway. He didn't like lying to Susan, but it was essential for his plan. Now, he just needed a moment to think of his next move. John rushed into the bathroom, locking himself in a stall to buy some time. He knew his boss's schedule well enough to remember a standing meeting at 10. If he could just stay hidden until then, he'd have a better chance to move around unnoticed. The sounds of the zoo faded behind the bathroom door, giving John a momentary peace in his chaotic day. John waited in the bathroom, checking his watch every few minutes. The seconds ticked by slowly, each one amplifying his anxiety. He kept listening for the sounds of the zoo to quiet down, a sign that his boss and others might be heading to the meeting. It was a strange hideout, but it was the best plan he had to avoid being seen too early. In the cramped stall, John carefully changed into his old work uniform he had brought along in his backpack. The familiar fabric felt both comforting and bizarre under the circumstances. Slipping into the uniform, he hoped it would make him less noticeable, blending in as just another employee amidst the morning routines. It was a small comfort, but he needed every advantage he could get. When the clock finally struck 10, John cautiously opened the bathroom door and peeked out. The coast seemed clear. Heart pounding, he stepped into the hallway, trying to act natural. He made a beeline for his boss's office, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Every step felt heavy, every glance in his direction a potential threat to his plan. But he had to move forward. John speed-walked through the building, his focus sharp. He could feel his heart racing, thumping against his chest with each step. Keeping his head down, he navigated the familiar corridors with a sense of urgency. He passed a few co-workers, but managed to avoid any direct interaction, thanks to his uniform and their preoccupation with their own tasks. The office was close now. His plan was in motion. John arrived at his boss's office, his breaths short and quick. He glanced around nervously, making sure no one was watching, before reaching for the door handle. To his dismay, it was locked. He tried a few more times, hoping for a miracle, but the door wouldn't budge. Standing there, he realized he hadn't planned for this. Panic began to set in as he wondered what to do next. Time was slipping away, and John frantically searched his mind for where the key to his boss's office might be kept. He checked the usual spots near the door and on nearby desks, but found nothing. The ticking clock echoed his growing panic. Without the key, his entire plan was at risk of falling apart before it even truly began. As John was debating his next move, the unmistakable sound of his boss's voice floated down the hallway, getting closer by the second. In a split-second decision, John dove behind a large filing cabinet, his heart pounding in his chest. He held his breath, praying not to be discovered. The voice grew louder, then stopped just outside the office door. The door swung open, and John's boss stepped inside, moving with purpose. He seemed preoccupied, barely glancing around as he grabbed a few documents from his desk. John, hidden just out of sight, watched silently, daring not to move a muscle. It was a tense moment, with John hoping against hope not to be noticed. In his hurry, John's boss dashed out of the office, leaving the door ajar. He had forgotten to lock it behind him, a rare mistake but fortunate for John. Waiting a few heartbeats to ensure the coast was clear, John exhaled a quiet sigh of relief. This was the break he had been waiting for, a small stroke of luck in his otherwise dismal situation. John quickly but cautiously made his way into the office, closing the door softly behind him. He moved swiftly to draw the blinds, ensuring no prying eyes could see inside. Once secluded, John began his urgent search through the office, looking for anything that might help him understand what had happened and, more importantly, prove his innocence. The stakes were high, and John knew he had to make every second count. On his boss's computer, John quickly stumbled upon a video file marked Classified CCTV Footage Seal Enclosure. His pulse quickened as he clicked on the file. This had to be the key to everything that had happened. John braced himself for what he was about to see, hoping it would shed light on the distressing behavior of the baby seal. John hit play on the video, keeping the sound off to avoid drawing attention. As the footage rolled, his eyes widened in disbelief. The images on the screen provided all the missing pieces, making the situation painfully clear. Though the specifics remained hidden from us, it was evident that this discovery had profound implications. John knew he needed to share this with his colleagues somehow. Realizing the sensitivity of the information, John understood the need for discretion. This revelation had the potential to seriously harm the zoo's reputation if not handled carefully. He needed a foolproof plan to bring this to light without causing unnecessary chaos. The weight of responsibility hung heavily on his shoulders as he pondered his next steps, determined to make things right. Just as John was about to log off the computer and leave the office, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. His heart skipped a beat when he realized it was his boss returning. Panicking, John scanned the room for a place to hide. There was no way out without being seen. His only option was to find a hiding spot within the office itself. With no time to spare, John darted towards the closet and slipped inside, pulling the door closed just as his boss entered the room. Hidden among coats and old files, John barely dared to breathe, listening as his boss moved around the office. The stakes were incredibly high, and John knew he couldn't afford to be caught now. He was so close to making things right, but for the moment, all he could do was wait in silence. Peering through the closet crack, John watched his boss settle at the desk and pick up the phone. The conversation that followed was muffled, but John caught enough to sense its gravity. Phrases about keeping things quiet and handling the John situation floated through the air. John's pulse quickened. He was the subject of whatever scheme was unfolding on the other side of the door. As the conversation grew more intense, John's boss began discussing substantial sums of money, all in the context of ensuring John's silence. The talk of bribes, or perhaps hush money, sent a chill down John's spine. It was clear they were planning something big, something unscrupulous, and it all revolved around keeping him out of the picture. Realizing the importance of what he was overhearing, John quietly pulled out his phone and started recording the conversation. Each word his boss uttered, unaware of being recorded, felt like a piece of ammunition in John's hands. This evidence was unexpected, but potentially game-changing. It could be the key to exposing the corruption and vindicating himself. After what felt like an eternity, John's boss finally ended the call and, grabbing his coat, left the office presumably for lunch. John waited for the sound of footsteps to fade before emerging from his cramped hideout. The office felt eerily silent now, a stark contrast to the tension of the moments before. With the coast clear, John stepped out, the recorded conversation heavy on his mind. As John navigated the now familiar corridors of the zoo, his mind raced with the implications of his discovery. Then, suddenly, a voice cut through his thoughts, urging him towards the concierge's closet. It was unexpected, almost out of place, but it sparked a curiosity. With few options and time running out, John found himself inexplicably drawn to follow the mysterious directive. As John hurried through the dimly lit corridors, a low voice broke through the silence, pulling him towards the concierge's closet. Unsure but desperate, John followed the sound, pushing open the closet door to find a shadowed figure inside. The dim light revealed it was Susan, her face etched with seriousness and concern. It was a moment of surprise and a sliver of hope for John. Inside the cramped space, Susan looked John straight in the eyes. "I know why you're really here, John," she said, her voice steady. The air was thick with tension as John realized his secret was out. With no more cards left to hide, he spilled everything: the baby seal, the CCTV footage, his dismissal. Susan listened intently, her resolve hardening as the story unfolded. After hearing John's story, Susan's expression softened into one of determination. "I want to help," she said without hesitation. The gravity of the situation was clear, and now they were allies in a cause much bigger than themselves. Together, in hushed tones, they began to craft a plan, a way to expose the truth without causing unnecessary harm to the zoo or the animals they both cherished. With a plan in place, John left the zoo, his spirits lifted slightly by Susan's commitment to their cause. It was a risky move, entrusting everything to someone else, but if they were going to bring about any change, it had to be a joint effort. As John headed home, the weight of their impending actions settled on his shoulders. The next move was Susan's. The next, back at the zoo, Susan received John's email, containing both the video of the seal enclosure and the audio recording of their boss's incriminating conversation. With a deep breath, she forwarded the email to all their colleagues, excluding their boss. It was a bold move, one that could change everything. As she hit send, Susan hoped their message would resonate, sparking the necessary questions and ultimately leading to justice for John and the seals. As Susan observed the ripple effect of the email through the workspace, she could barely contain her anticipation. Colleagues huddled in small groups, their expressions a mix of shock and resolve. The energy in the room had shifted palpably. Whispers of disbelief and anger mingled with the air. Susan knew then that their carefully laid plan was beginning to take root. Soon, Susan's desk became the epicenter of an impromptu meeting. Colleagues bombarded her with questions, their voices a blend of curiosity and outrage. "How did you find this?" "What's our next move?" they asked, looking to Susan for leadership. She realized the power of unity at that moment, their collective spirit fueling the courage she needed for the next step. The sudden appearance of their boss passing by sent a wave of silence across the room. Eyes darted towards him, laden with unspoken accusations and anger. The boss, puzzled by the cold reception, hurried into his sanctuary, oblivious to the storm brewing outside. The tension was palpable, a silent standoff between truth and authority. Once their boss vanished from sight, Susan seized the moment to assert her intention. "I'll confront him later today," she declared, her voice steady with resolve. The room erupted in murmurs of approval and anxiety. This was it, the point of no return. Susan's declaration was more than a personal commitment. It was a rallying cry for justice. As expected, the call came. "Susan, he wants to see you in his office," relayed a colleague, a mix of concern and anticipation in their eyes. Susan nodded, a sense of inevitability washing over her. This was the moment they had been preparing for, the chance to confront the issue head-on. With a deep breath, she walked towards the office, ready to unveil the truth. In the quiet of the office, Susan played the footage for her boss, showing him clearly upsetting the baby seal by kicking its food away and throwing its play ball out of reach. His actions on the screen spoke louder than any words could. The boss watched, his face a mask of surprise and discomfort, as his casual cruelty was laid bare for both of them to see. The boss, caught in the act, scrambled for an explanation. "I was just playing," he stammered, attempting to brush off his actions as harmless fun. But the gravity of what he'd done, the distress it caused the innocent animal, couldn't be dismissed so lightly. Susan saw right through his weak attempt at justification, her resolve only strengthening. Without missing a beat, Susan played the audio recording of his phone conversation, discussing plans to silence John. As the damning words filled the room, the boss's face turned from shock to realization. The evidence was undeniable. his plot, his disregard for the welfare of the animals and the integrity of the zoo was out in the open. The game was up. The boss slumped back into his chair, the fight draining out of him as the weight of his actions settled in. He had been caught, exposed for all he was, and there was no way out. The realization of his imminent downfall was written clearly across his face. In that moment, he knew everything he had built was crumbling around him. Susan, standing firm, laid out her terms. "The footage gets deleted if you rehire John and resign immediately after," she stated, her voice steady and uncompromising. It was a simple choice. Accept responsibility and step down, or face the consequences of his actions becoming public. Susan left no room for negotiation, her stance clear and her demand for justice unwavering. In a move that shocked the entire staff, their boss upheld his end of the deal and resigned by the week's end. The announcement came suddenly, a swift turn of events that left the zoo buzzing with whispers and relief. His departure marked the end of a tense chapter for everyone involved, paving the way for a fresh start and a hopeful future for the zoo and its residents. With the previous boss's exit, John was quickly brought back to the zoo, his position and dignity restored. His colleagues welcomed him with open arms, celebrating the return of a beloved friend and a passionate caretaker. The atmosphere was one of jubilation and renewed spirits, as John's reputation among his peers remained untarnished, solidified even further by his unwavering commitment to the animals. Despite the turmoil, the decision was unanimous to keep the footage private, a secret shared among those who called the zoo their workplace. Everyone understood the stakes. Releasing the video could damage the zoo's reputation, a risk no one was willing to take. It was a pact made for the greater good, protecting the sanctuary that they all loved and ensuring its doors stayed open to the public. Upon John's return, the baby seal's spirits lifted noticeably, its behaviour a stark contrast to the distress it had shown. The seal frolicked and played, its eyes brighter and its energy unmatched, clearly rejoicing in John's presence. It was a testament to the bond they shared, a connection that transcended words, witnessed by all who passed by their enclosure. The arrival of the new boss brought a wave of positive change. She was a figure of warmth and authority, her vision for the zoo aligned with the well-being of its inhabitants and the satisfaction of its staff. Her leadership style was inclusive and forward-thinking, inspiring confidence and loyalty from the get-go. Under her guidance, the zoo began to thrive in ways it hadn't before, promising a brighter future for everyone involved.